Hey everyone, it's Marla here. In this week's video, I'm going to show you how I took some thrift flips and some items I already had in my home and turned them into beautiful farmhouse cottagecore Christmas decorations. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, then stick around and watch what I did. I put projects 1 and 2 together because these are 2 items I already had in my home, an old mirror that I thrifted and a wreath, and I want to show you how I upcycled them for this holiday season. I thrifted this mirror for $10 when I was in Arizona last April attending Royce's retreat. I started out by mixing DIY's crinoline with some vintage linen. I didn't want it to be stark white, but the crinoline was just a little bit too yellow for my liking. Once I got the paint all mixed up, I used a soft brush to make sure that I could get it down into all of the details of this frame. If you're new to my channel, my name is Marla and I'm the owner and creator behind From Rust to Roses Vintage. I have a small antique booth in the Antique Mall of America here in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I sell a lot of the things that I upcycle, as well as many DIY products like Fusion Mineral Paint, DIY paint, as well as Sweet Pickins milk paint, IOD products, and Roycycled papers, along with Connie's Lines and Designs. I've always loved vintage antique items, and I love to take things that I thrift and turn them into beautiful home decor. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, then please check out my playlist. Even though I'm new to YouTube, I finally have enough videos to actually create a playlist. Once I had the frame completely painted, I just used a piece of copy paper and slipped it in between the mirror and the frame and used that to go along the edge with a small brush and get those parts that I missed. I'm not really one for taping up things, and I knew that this paint would be very easy to wipe off. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm doing here. Once I had given it 2 coats of paint, I went back with a wet wipe and started wiping away some of the paint to distress it a little bit. Because I had used DIY paint, which is clay-based, I had to seal it. So I let the paint dry and then went in with a good coat of DIY liquid patina. Once the patina had dried, I went back in with Fusion antiquing glaze, working it down into the details of the frame, and then taking a wet cloth to wipe back any of the excess. I was really happy with the final look of the frame. Once the frame was complete, then I turned my attention to the wreath. I purchased these wreaths several years ago. I actually have 2 of them. I think from Kirkland's or Home Goods, someplace like that. And I had had them out for spring and summer. And I was going to start with a brand new wreath and then decided, why not use the ones that you already have? The colors are green and white. It would be pretty easy to add some red and some Christmas floral and turn these into Christmas wreaths. And I did it in such a way that I took the red berries and the frosted pieces of pine and glued them together with a hot glue gun and then wired them onto the wreaths. And that way, when Christmas is over, I can easily take those pieces off and go back to having just the green and white wreaths. After I had everything in place, I wanted a little more fullness, so I found another old piece of Christmas floral that I cut apart with some pine branches on it, and then I took those branches and I just hot glued them on top of the Christmas florals I had already added to the wreath. I finished the project by adding a long red velvet ribbon to the wreath and then some garland and the wreath to the mirror hanging on the wall. I have another mirror on the opposite side of my fireplace, and so I did the other wreath exactly like this one for that mirror. I'm thrilled with the results considering how little money I have invested in this. I might add some more red or ornaments to the garland before Christmas, but for now, this is perfect. For project 3, I went out into my garage and found this sign that was painted on what was very similar to barnwood on the front, and I loved that. And so I decided that I was going to turn this into a sign for Christmas. I did do some sanding on it, but I knew I was going to paint it, and so I didn't worry too much about the lettering. For this project, I'm using the new Alchemy paint by Fusion in the color Birch. It is a clay paint, but unlike DIY, you don't have to seal it if you don't want to. I had already decided I was going to put a paint inlay on this, and so here I'm giving it a second coat of the birch paint, and then I'm laying down my inlay. This is from the new 2025 holiday release by IOD. I wet the paper before I put it down, and then spritzed it lightly after it was down, dabbing back excess with paper towel. After it had completely dried, I went back and wet it down again with my sprayer, and once again dabbing off the excess water with a paper towel, and then I waited a few seconds before trying to remove it. It really gave me those old country vibes, farmhouse vibes, especially since it was on that textured wood that was like barnwood. I knew I was going to go in with sandpaper and distress it, but I decided this time, instead of using antiquing glaze, which I normally do, I would go in with some clear wax followed by dark wax. And I absolutely love the way it turned out. I hope you agree. As I've said in many of my videos, I always apply clear wax first, and that way it gives me a buffer between the paint and the dark wax. So I applied a good coat of clear wax and then wiped back the excess with a soft cloth before going in with the dark wax. I apologize that parts of my video are out of frame or that you can't see the entire project, but I wasn't working up in my studio where I usually work. I came down and worked in the kitchen so I could hang out with my family while they were watching football. I love how it goes perfectly with all my vintage items, and as you can see as I go close up here, that barnwood texture showing through. I just love it. It's another one of those items that I don't know if it will make it to my booth or not. We'll see. I guess I can always make a second one because you can use these inlays more than once. I put projects 4 and 5 together because they are both jars that I had in my stash. They are the older type jars that have the metal closure, and I thought they would be great upcycled to hold things for Christmas. I wanted to embellish one of the jars with some Christmas tree molds, and so I'm mixing together my Fabricast, but I mixed it not 1-to-1. I put in 1 part of part A and then about 50% of that amount of part B. I have found that when you do that, the molds will still come out, but they're a little more flexible, and since this jar was round, I needed something that would curve around the jar. Well, shoot, I guess there's proof that they were watching football. I could go back and delete that little bit of conversation, but then I would have to delete the entire portion that I had just recorded. So after I had all of the molds done, I used some Titebond Quick and Thick and put it on the back and then curved them around the jar and used painter's tape to hold them on until the paint dried. Until the glue dried. Once the glue had dried, I decided I was going to paint all of the Christmas trees with the Fusion mineral paint color in Everett It's a nice dark green, perfect for the Christmas season. After finishing with the dark green, I wanted to add some highlights to the trees, so I got out a lighter shade of green. I believe this is conservatory, and went over all the high points on the Christmas trees. Because you could see the back of the molds through the glass, I wanted to do something to try and disguise that. I didn't have any frosted spray paint, which at this point it would have been too late to use that anyway. So I ran upstairs in my stash and I found this crystal paste that I had bought from Pent Art and decided that I would try it and see if it worked. And it actually worked beautifully. It gave me the frosted look that I wanted and disguised kind of the back of the molds. I then went in with some snow paste or glitter paste at the bottom to make it look like snow at the foot of all the trees, and then added a little bit of that snow to the trees themselves. I hadn't decided what I wanted to do for the top of the jar. I knew on the other jar I was going to use a mold, but for this one I wasn't sure. And then as I was looking around in my stash, I found this beautiful round copper piece that I had gotten on Whatnot, and not really knowing what I was going to do with it. And as it turns out, it was a perfect fit for this jar, so I used a little Titebond Quick and Thick and glued it to the top. Once the lid was in place, I used my fingers to wipe off the excess glue and then just set the jar aside to dry. I wasn't sure what I was going to fill it with. I thought about some small vintage ornaments so the colors could show through, or maybe old vintage Christmas bulbs, but in the end, I decided to use it to store my vintage cookie cutters. I love how this jar turned out, and I'm definitely not going to take this one to my booth because I can do so many different things with it. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. And also, I thought about putting a candle in it, maybe with some nice colored Christmas bulbs, vintage ones around it. What do you think? Should I do that or leave in the cookie cutters? For project 5, I took my second jar, which was a little bit smaller, and I had made a frame mold for it. And when the mold came out, it was flexible, and so I taped it onto the jar and let it harden to that shape. So now all I have to do is add some Quick and Thick Titebond glue and glue that frame in place. And then I use some painter's tape to hold it down until it dries. My thought for this jar was to turn it into a candy jar, and so I wanted to paint it a bright, beautiful red. This is Fort York Red by Fusion Mineral Paint. I'm using a sponge to apply the paint because I don't like brush marks on glass, or actually on anything, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to really sand this one to get any brush marks out, so I just used the sponge, and I really like the textured look that it gave the paint. I did end up applying 2 coats and then went in and painted the bottom with this red paint as well. After the paint had dried, and because it had a built-in sealer, I was able to go in and add a transfer over the frame. I just picked a transfer out of one of the IOD holiday transfer books, and cut it out to the shape that I thought would fit around the frame. And then I turned my attention to the top. I'm using the rosette mold here. I chose one that had a very vintage look to it. And then just use some air dry clay, this time instead of resin. That way it would be very easy to mold to the top of the jar. I painted the jar top and the frame in raw silk, but somehow I didn't get that recorded. Once I had the mold glued to the lid, then I knew it was time to get out that raw silk paint again and paint the mold. If you paint your molds before they're completely dry, you'll find that you get less cracking. Just make sure that you use a soft brush so that you don't damage any of the details in your mold. After the raw silk paint had dried, I used the leftover wax in my 2 brushes, gave it a coat of clear wax followed by some dark wax to bring out the details. I filled the jar with some red and white peppermint candies, tied a ribbon around the top, and I think it is darling. It definitely gives off that vintage cottagecore vibe. I'm tempted to make a few more. You'll have to let me know what you think of it in the comments. For my 6th and final project, I grabbed this vase or container that I've had in my garage for I don't know how long. I think I paid less than $3 for this at Goodwill, and I've been wanting to upcycle it for a long time. Just wasn't sure what I was going to put in it. I did take it outside and give it 2 coats of Rust-Oleum flat black matte paint. I knew I was going to cover it in an off-white paint, but I was also going to distress it, and I want some of that black to show through if possible. The paint I'm using here is a mixture of raw silk and salt wash. I'm dabbing it on with a brush so I can get some added texture, and I ended up giving this container 2 coats of the salt wash mixture. Once the paint had thoroughly dried, I used sandpaper to sand some of the paint back. Had it been a DIY clay paint, I could have used a wet cloth, but I went with Fusion mineral paint because it had that built-in top coat, and I knew I wouldn't have to go over it with another sealer. Once I had it distressed as much as I wanted, which really doesn't show up in the video as much as it's actually distressed, I went over it with a coat of clear wax again, wiping back the excess with a cloth, and then going over that with dark wax to bring out whatever detail there was. Once I was finished with the distressing, I filled the container with some floral foam and some greenery that I had picked up pretty much on the cheap. I think less than $8 for all of the greenery I put in here. And I think it turned out absolutely beautiful. I did add a red and white striped ribbon at the top just to give it a little more festive flair. I hope you enjoyed the video and all of the items that I upcycled this week. I love them. I don't know if I have a favorite. I just love being able to take things that other people have tossed aside, or even things that I've had in my own home for a while, and turn them into beautiful decor. If this is something that you enjoy as well, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful week.